Is the Mindful Man reading another chapter from Ghost School? The pond was about 200 yards across and he couldn't feel the bottom. He swam to the middle and turned around to see the girls watching from the bank. Tom was swimming around the circumference in a big circle, shouting and hollering. James threw himself into the water and regretted it. How did I ever get into this, he thought. He was a good swimmer and he made a dive for the bottom. He tried not to think of the creatures swimming about as he was quite squeamish. He opened his eyes and could see a lot of different coloured fish swimming about, like rainbows in motion. He spotted a bicycle at the bottom and swam over to investigate. It was very rusty. He tried to move the pedal, but it was stiff. James was getting tired and so he decided to swim back. As he did so, his foot caught round something. He pulled away, but wherever it was just pulled tighter. He began to panic and thrash around, causing large bubbles to spring to the surface. He could see the sunlight dappling on the surface and he longed to get there. By now he was feeling very weak and losing hope. The more he tugged, the tighter it became. It was probably that bloody bike chain, he thought. So much for my inquisitive nature. Suddenly he saw a shape above the water. Someone was diving in. The blur became clearer and he realized it was Tom swimming towards him. He was relieved, whoever it was. Tom grabbed the bike chain and wrestled with it. By now James felt like it passing out. Everything was getting darker with the colours going out one by one. James heard a loud crack and then he felt Tom's arms around him. His foot felt free and he could feel himself rise to the surface. He gasped the air into his lungs as he surfaced to be blinded by the sunlight. Tom swam with him, dragging him as he did so. He placed him gently on the bank while the girls rushed over to see how he was. He was flustered and disorientated, but slowly he came back to reality. Lucy kissed him and Anna gave him a big hug. He was relieved to be safe and he swallowed his pride and went over to Tom and shook his hand. All of his animosity towards him disappeared. "Thanks, man," he said. "You did great." "No problem," said Tom, flashing his famous white smile. This time it didn't annoy James and he felt himself warming to him. After all, he had just saved his life. Lucy passed him bottled water which he guzzled down. The escapade had put the girls off going into the water, so they decided to wander deeper into the woods. "This time let's not get lost," said Anna. They marched on as the sunlight shone through the trees and the birds were whistling everywhere. After 10 minutes of crunching over the leaves, they came across an old cottage. It was bedraggled looking, with weeds growing out of the chimney, and the wooden slats over the windows were hanging loose. Above the round red front door they approached with trepidation. They had to step over the weeds on the pathway, which looked as if they had been designed to obstruct any curious visitors. The rusty gate creaked loudly, sending crows flapping into the air as they mimicked the sound. They gingerly stepped inside, brushing cobwebs away from their faces that hung like a veil. The room was dimly lit with broken towels on the floor and pictures hanging at an angle. There was a small kitchen and wash basin full of broken, dirty crockery. It looked like it hadn't seen washing up liquid or a good mop for an age. A few creaky-looking rocking chairs faced each other at each end of the living room. There was a bookshelf stuffed with dusty books, and a wooden table stood looking lonely and unpolished in the centre of the room. "Well," said James, "this is so spooky." "Yes," said Tom, "ain't it great?" James was now acquainted with his Americanisms, and he wasn't annoyed. In fact, he was amused. The girls tiptoed gingerly into the room, watching where they stepped as the floor was thick with grime. "This is amazing," said Lucy, "like a fairy tale." "More like a nightmare," said Anne. "It's just like the Brothers Grimm." Lucy ran a finger across the books, scattering cobwebs and dust everywhere. She looked at the titles and they were all concerning medicine and history and geography, all subjects that she knew nothing about. Anne grabbed a book and flicked through it, sending a puff of smoke into the air and into Lucy's nostrils. Lucy sneezed heavily. the sound reverberating around the room and startling more crows, who filled the sky outside the cottage's broken window. Tom and James sat at the table and looked down at the rusty cutlery and 2 glasses which were definitely not going to be filled. In the middle of the table was a large, heavy-looking brown book. They wiped the cobwebs off and began leafing through it, and to their surprise it was a photography album. At first it was full of beautiful photos of the woods in all seasons and photos of the lovely roses that once grew outside the door. As they turned more pages it became less optimistic and more dark. In the middle of the book it showed a couple holding hands and looking like they were in love. Hope you like this chapter. Please sub me.